You want to know what's one disadvantage of being short? Sometimes when I reach back there to set up those tapestries, I feel a little bit of a strain in my leg while I try to stretch myself all the way to get back there. Now, that's not due to the fact that I'm growing old, no, it's simply just due to my height. Thankfully, overall, it's not too bad since everything in Japan seems to be made for short people. But anyway, when it comes to arcade games in Japan, I feel like they have always, even till this day, made up a fairly strong part of the gaming culture here. Now, what are arcades, you ask? Imaginary Gen Alpha person who I'm pretend I'm talking to right now? I was about to do like some kind of Gen Alpha catchphrase or something about like, you know, the thing and stuff, but I feel like people are probably getting sick of me doing it every other video, so we'll not do that this time. But I can understand that for some people, you might not be as familiar with what arcades are like nowadays, especially in the West. It does seem like the culture of having these kind of places to play around in isn't as big as it used to be back in the past. But essentially, to put it very simply, these are places where in the past you would go outside to play games instead. It's kind of like touching grass, except you're going into a concrete room where there isn't really any grass, but there are plenty of games more so than beyond your wildest imaginations, especially back then. Now, sometimes they were very noisy as well with all the loud sounds and sights that you could see in the place. A little bit stinky due to all the sweaty people just constantly spending hours in there. Also, if you live in Japan specifically, I think it's more of a thing here, but people were allowed to smoke in there as well. And you tend to see some very weird people every once in a while. So all in all, it's kind of like that one friend you had as a kid who basically had all the coolest consoles because his parents didn't love him, and you know, it would be like visiting his house instead. No, I'm not projecting, okay? Back in the day, my family wasn't very rich, so instead I had to suffice myself with playing like bootleg Vietnamese Pokemon instead. But anyway, arcades did lose their appeal to some extent. I can imagine why. After all, many of the big titles that used to be arcade games have all managed to find their way onto home consoles and PCs nowadays, especially in the case of fighting games like your Guilty Gears, your Soul Calibur, Street Fighters. A lot of them initially were in arcades first, but now have moved over there, as well as some of the bullet hell games, as well as even games like Metal Slug, which used to be one of the big highlights for me back when I was a kid playing in arcades. Unfortunately, you can't even find the game in arcades anymore. That's how far we have come since then, but... No, I'm not growing old. No, I'm not growing old. No, I'm not. And if you wanted to play Time Crisis as well, nowadays you can even play Time Crisis at home using something like the Wii. Well, I mean, with the Wii, it's more like you're playing Time Crisis at home since it's a different game, but conceptually and mechanically, it's more or less the same thing. But that said, that doesn't stop the companies within Japan from coming up with new ways to try and get people interested in arcade games. And we have seen many of them attempting to do this through the creation of many experiences that you really can't get at home, with things such as Mai Mai as well as Ongeki. These are games where the machine that is required to play the game is something that, unless you are really rich and you could drop like tens of thousands of dollars to get one of these machines, they would be pretty hard to get, especially since you would only be able to use them for one game, and that can be quite a disincentive for most people to want to get it. But that makes it fairly easy for an arcade to get it in and just have like plenty, maybe even hundreds of people playing the same machine. And the event we're talking about today is one where many of these companies basically go to show off their latest machines that they're planning to release and let people enjoy the vibes of an arcade, even if it's just for a single day. And yes, that means that we're talking about... I don't know why I say this as if people are going to know what the name of the event already is. It's in the title, you know what it is, more or less. It's Amusement Expo. That said, though, it does feel like the name of the convention doesn't really get across the idea of an arcade very well. Like, I feel like I have plenty of ways that I could entertain myself that do not require an arcade. Wait, no, it's this hand. And that right hand. That said, there is a little bit of a history as to how this event got its name, as it was initially formed from the merger of two other events back in 2013. The Amusement Machine Show and the AOU Amusement Expo. So, I guess it kind of took the fact that it had the word amusement in both of this event's name, and it basically just took the back half of the AOU Amusement Expo and used that as the name of the event. Both of these events also did have quite a lot of history to them, with the Amusement Expo... These names are hard to remember. The Amusement Machine Show starting in 1967, the AOU Amusement Expo starting in 1982. And the AOU Amusement Expo got its name due to the fact that it was an event that wasn't purely just for arcade games at the time, but involved all forms of amusement, including amusement rides, as well as the coin changer machines used at many of these places as well. The event was initially held in Chiba at Makuhari Messe, which is where many big events are still held today, and it was typically held in the middle of November for 2 days technically. I say technically because it's only really open to the public for 1 day, and for the other day it's purely just for business visitors. Kind of like with what TGS does, except with TGS, the Tokyo Game Show, it's 2 days of business and 2 days of consumer instead. So thankfully for us, however, like, praise the gods, it would seem that the last time we did a video on any one of this type of events, and I said that I hope we didn't have to go back to Chiba, it would seem that whatever god we accidentally prayed to actually responded, because this event is actually, or at least in the recent few years, has been held at Tokyo Big Sight instead, and it takes up 2 of the East Halls, which, fun fact, if I'm not mistaken, Reitaisai is actually around like 3 East Halls big, so this event is technically 1 East Hall smaller than Reitaisai, which is the Toho Dojin event. That's not to say this event is small, of course, there are plenty of events that are much smaller. I just find it to be a bit of an interesting tidbit to like show how big the event for Toho actually is in comparison, because it still blows my mind to this day how big that one is. But that's a story for another time. But yeah, either way, the event wasn't small by any stretch of the imagination, with there being 51 companies there setting up booths, and there being 5,922 attendees according to the data put out by the event itself, which that number is not the biggest, right? When you compare it to something like Comic Cat, it certainly is a lot smaller, but when you compare it to many of the smaller events out there, it is still quite sizable. Although on the day itself, it was kind of confusing trying to gauge how many people there were, since when I initially got there, I looked around and there were like so many people like struggling to get into Big Sight itself, and I thought like, wow, this event is actually this big. It's actually almost bigger than Anime Japan at that point. And then I realized that like, nah, it's just the fact that there were like 4 events simultaneously going on the day itself, with 1 in the West Hall and 2 other events in the East Hall, along with the Amusement Expo itself. One of which was a dental expo, and the other was like some sports day-ish thing for some school, I think, that was having it in the convention center for some reason. Thankfully, I guess in a way it kind of works out, since for most of us gamers who spend too much time indoors, you know, I feel like a dental expo is something that we could learn a lot from, and in sports days, you know, it's something that we probably need to attend a little more to make sure that we don't like die from a heart attack from trying to leave a single piece of french fry at some point. But either way, when I got into the Amusement Expo itself, the area was actually fairly spacious. It reminded me a lot more of something like Anime Expo, where you did have pretty big spaces set up between the booths so that the crowd itself wouldn't jam. This is a lot more different to, I would say, even the corporate booth area within Comic Cat, where, you know, with Dojin events, you can expect that the booths or the individual creators have like maybe a 2 to 3 person space between the booth, so it's not a lot. And with this event, Amusement Expo, I think there was about a 10-person space that you could really have 10 people stand side by side and walk through in between the booths and still be completely fine. So it was a lot more chill trying to get through the event itself. It was actually surprising as well to see many of the big names from back in the day still fairly active in the space itself. Like you had Bandai Namco, Sega, Konami, Taito, and even Capcom was there showing off like some of the Street Fighter gameplay and having a mini tournament for some reason. Although I guess fighting games themselves are still fairly popular in arcades, so that does make sense. Another thing that was quite surprising was seeing Bandai Namco there releasing a new Idolmaster arcade game as well. I remember Yuri over on Discord actually mentioned something about this a while back, although like because of the fact that there isn't much about news about this going on around typically, I just kind of forgot it was a thing until I got to the event itself. But it was interesting seeing Bandai Namco suddenly make the decision to revert to actually having this game in the arcades as well, because for all of you kids out there, let me tell you a bit about the history of Idolmaster. With the Idolmaster series, it did initially start as something that was in the arcades first and foremost, and then we started to see it actually move onto consoles, with I believe the first game actually being on the Xbox 360 before moving on to the PS3, because Bandai Namco pulled a fucky-wacky with Microsoft, and you know, then there's a lot that went on there. But Basically, the series after that mostly moved onto consoles and then onto PC with a bit of a mix between the two. And it's only with this most recent iteration that it does seem that they are choosing to return to making an arcade game for some reason. The booth itself was actually pretty grand. Like, you did have a nice looking stage with the outfits of some of the characters on it. You had some of the official art, the key visuals with some of the characters with the game in it. And the thing with the characters as well is that because with this new arcade game, they were apparently releasing a game which basically had all the different Idolmaster characters from all of the other IPs that they had, including Side M, all in one game. Not this one though, it would seem, because this one's probably too new. You know, it's still too alpha gen people who probably don't know what arcades are, so they probably decided that like they wouldn't want to go to an arcade anyway. But every other IP aside from that one, including Shiny Colors, was in this time around. They even had a mini like photo taking area where you could like set up your little acrylic stands or your tiny Idolmaster Fumos, you know, kind of like this cute little girl here, except much smaller and more Idolmastery, and you could basically just take pictures of them there. Unfortunately, they didn't really have any photo taking areas for us life-size persons. Also, they didn't give out a promotional card for the game itself, because remember, this is an arcade game, especially one that Bandai Namco is planning to release for an Idol series. Gotta appeal to the hoarder brain in all of us and release cards that everybody's gonna spend like huge amounts of money to collect. It's like gacha, except with a giant machine instead. But yeah, this is the card itself. I don't know how obvious it is, but it actually looks really nice in person because of the hollow foil-ishness of it. I guess you can see from the image now the light reflecting off the card, so at least you can see that there's some level of gloss to it. But looking at it like in front of me here, it actually has quite a fair bit of a hollow, shiny foil going on with it. So it's a lot nicer looking in person. Makes me really want to try out the game when it releases. Hopefully, I don't fall into some kind of gambling addiction and waste all of my money on this, but at the very least, I think I'll probably want to give it a try since I didn't really get a chance to do so in the venue itself, which was kind of unfortunate. You know, the thing is that they actually had a digital queue system, so you didn't have to wait in the queue the entire time, and they only really had a queue for the people whose queue number was about to come. And the craziest thing about the whole of that queuing situation was that they had already cut off the queue when I got there, so no one else was being added in. But in spite of the fact that when it was 74 minutes when I was there, for some reason it seemed to increase every single hour. So a few hours into the event, when I walked past the booth again, I think it became like 121 to 164 minutes instead. So yeah, I don't know how they managed to fuck up the queue so badly that they managed to almost double the length of the queue with no one being added into it. But this is Bandai Namco we're talking about. They have an expertise when it comes to fucking things up, so I'm sure they found a way. But that said, I feel like that was the name of the game with many of this like more popular new machines that were up in the event itself. So with the Idolmaster one, thankfully I did manage to at least see what the game was like, in the sense that I actually managed to see some people like playing with the machine, and it does seem a lot like just a rhythm game, except that you kind of had some ability to manipulate like the stage itself to make it more grand and add effects and all of that. And it's basically like a mix of like Project Diva with the whole like character customization things, as well as the stage selection things with like a rhythm game. So that was pretty fine-ish. It's hard to say what the actual game will be fully like, since they only really let people play those segments, but at the very least it should be interesting. But the thing that was a little, I guess, like that made this event feel a little tough to want to do stuff, and is simply the fact that a lot like with the Tokyo Game Show, with this event it really was the case that the queues everywhere were just really bad. You wanted to play Taiko, that was also more than an hour's wait. You wanted to show that you were a true crane gamer, they actually had a little testing you could do there where they actually graded you based off how well and how skilled you were at crane games. Because remember, with Japan's like crane games, it's not just the one thing where you had the claw come down and pick up the thing, but they do have many different styles of crane games where sometimes the objective was to use the edge or the single hook or claw of the machine to like lift something and push it off an edge or something. And sometimes, because of all the fact that they had so many different gimmicks, they decided to make a little testing that you could do and get graded for. And the thing is that even that had like an 80-minute queue. All of the other like companies, the big ones there, also had their own mini prize game crane machines up, and all of those typically also had about a 60-minute plus queue. So yeah, in spite of the fact that there were only 5,922 people there, somehow they managed to like pack up the place like so well that everything seemed to be about as long as something like the Tokyo Game Show in terms of the wait time to just experience anything. Although I guess with an arcade game, typically a single sit through is a lot longer than a demo experience for like something like a TGS like game demo. So I guess it kind of makes a little more sense why it would be a lot longer even for just a single playthrough. So I didn't really want to spend a lot of time waiting in queue, so I didn't really get to try out most of the activities, but I did manage to browse a lot of the exhibits that they had up there. And this came in the form of the many companies that produce the prize goods, such as the prize figures that you see in the crane game machines, and the other forms of like blankets and the like, all basically displaying all of the goods that they have for like upcoming machines within the place as well. So you had like Banpresto, which is a figure branch of Bandai Namco, for example, which was basically showing off a lot of the new figures that they were planning to release for all of these machines going forward, which is pretty cool considering the fact that like with Bandai Namco, they do have a lot of licenses with many of the big like anime IP brands out there. So you did see figures for a lot of these series that will probably tickle the little nostalgia brain within your head a little bit here and there. It doesn't matter whether you're an old man like me, or I mean, I'm not that old, but it doesn't matter whether you're a slightly older people person, or if you're like one of those hip and cool Zoomer Sigma brain kids, right? Everyone will probably see something there that they'll probably recognize. Although the only thing with the whole Bandai Namco like booth itself is just the fact that I feel like it could have been done a little better in terms of the lighting, because with some of the figures, the lighting on it was so weird that it just felt a little hard to take pictures of instead. I don't know how they managed to mess it up that bad when setting it up, but yeah, one can always believe, I suppose. Meanwhile, Sega had a very big exhibit there as well. It felt a little awkward walking through it after with all the thought of the recent lawsuit they did on BOI like running through my brain. To be honest, it felt a little awkward there. And the fact that they had the cursed yellow banana as a photo taking like mascot outside of their booth felt a little weird as well. You know, I thought we were done with these little yellow shits after all this time, but it would seem that for some reason, even in the year 2024, we can't escape them. You know, they have been relegated in the rest of the world to basically being everybody's mom's favorite thing to use as a meme about finally murdering someone on Facebook. But even then, for some reason in Japan, it's still fairly beloved by kids, so that's a little unfortunate. But aside from that, they did have a fairly big area for Conan as well as for the Hatsune Miku movie that they're planning to do, as well as all of the goods for Hatsune Miku in general, for the arcade game that they have, and I guess in a way for Project Sekai, some of its marketing as well. Looking through the figures that both Sega and Banpresto had though, it really kind of reminded me how far like arcade crane game figures have come over the years. Like back in my day, when I was the hip and spry cool like gangsta 420 kid around the block, they used to have like price figures as well, but the quality did feel a lot worse than what it is at now. Like some of the figures, I don't really have any with me, unfortunately, but I do feel like there is a lot more detail that's put into both the outfits of the figures as well as in terms of the details like the face as well as the body structure and the like than what they used to put into a lot of these price figures back in the day. So that was pretty interesting, since for me personally, because of the fact that I live in a very tiny house, that like you can really see that this is pretty much the entirety of my entire room back here, right? It's so packed that I barely have space to put anything, and one day this might cause my room to collapse and kill me in the process. But let's leave aside that potential like building health violation risk. These price figures are something I haven't looked at in a while, but seeing them all here again kind of reminded me of like how far they have come over the years. Meanwhile, Konami was there as well, also another company that it felt a little weird walking through after like the thoughts of the lawsuit that they like did last year, like all just running through my head. But aside from that, they did have a lot of pretty cool like goods as well. Not so much figures, they just had more like towels as well as a more wide range of like Ken badges and the like that they were displaying there for stuff like Metal Gear, Resident Evil, Yu-Gi-Oh, and the one Kuma Bomb Girl series, which, you know, at this point, I'm just surprised they haven't just released this as a mobile game, considering how much they're earning from their like sports baseball games and all of that. Like, I feel like they could just release this as a competition to like Nikkei or something, and they'll probably do pretty well. Like, I mean, hey, Konami, you can hit me up. Like, I actually don't. I really don't want your what you guys did to Kojima kind of scares me a lot. So don't hit me up, but you can feel free to take the idea and just make a mobile game out of that. Meanwhile, with Sega, aside from the things I just mentioned, they also did have an entire section for the more casual, like family-friendly goods as well. Stuff like Sumiko Gurashi or like the Disney goods that they were also having for prize machines, which, you know, doesn't appeal to the same group of people as the anime stuff does, maybe, perhaps. But it certainly is interesting to see the huge range of goods that they actually had prepared for all of these prize goods for the crane machines and the the like. Aside from that, Sega also had a completely separate display area for all of their machines as well. So you could go there and look at the showcase of all the new machines. And they also had a small exhibit area for the history of all of the different machines that they've been producing over the years. So basically, all that Sega has been doing in terms of hardware aside from game consoles. And they actually had like the entire timeline there. It was actually pretty cool. Like I learned that they apparently started by first making jukeboxes as well as pinball machines, and then that's how they moved into later on arcades and how they have been like progressed through with arcades over the years. They even had some like replicas of the original jukebox that they had at the time, and as well as the very first crane machine they made, and I think the first arcade machine built as well. Unfortunately, you couldn't really try out any of those. They're mostly just there for the display itself, but it was still pretty cool to just walk through and like experience that history. They even had posters for all of the titles that they released for arcades over the years, so that was also very nostalgic and very good for tickling my old man brain, both with the old titles as well as with some of the titles that are fairly new and released in the past few years. Though that said, aside from all of that, one thing that this convention really reminded me of is like how much gambling simulators games there are in arcades as well. And what I mean by this is the fact that like this is like one of those little weird loopholey things in Japan, but like technically most forms of gambling are very strongly controlled, with many forms being illegal. Like it was only in very recent years where Japan finally started to release like a license for casinos within Japan, and prior to that you only really had things like pachinko, but even then that was basically something that the government only really allowed for like historical and cultural reasons, and technically you weren't supposed to win money from it, but there's this like weird like loophole thing which basically allowed them to set up pachinkos, and like if you got the cash payout in a different store that was technically someone else in a way that is just like outside of the pachinko parlor itself, you could get away with like getting money out of the thing. Like the whole thing with gambling has always been fairly grey, but that's all not really as related to like what the video on hand right now is about. We'll put it aside for now. Either way, what I'm trying to say is that there are a lot of games in arcades that, while they don't give out payouts in the same way that these pachinko parlors do, they typically just give you like actual plush or the prize figures and prize goods that I talked about before. They still are quite a few of these games that I just completely forgot existed, simply due to the fact that typically with many of the multi-story arcades, they tend to be on a completely different floor from the parts that I do tend to frequent, and so I don't really see them as much, even though they have been around for quite a long time. Right, usually I just end up seeing the rhythm games maybe once in a while. I would see Kankole because that's still alive, as well as JoJo Battle Arena Battle Royale. Yeah, apparently there's a thing that's only in arcades in Japan. I don't know what the business decision behind that was. But hey, I'm not here to question the IP that allowed you to play as Jotaro taking a piss back on the SNES. The thing with the arcade games though that we're talking about this time around is just more the fact that it's just kind of surprising to me how much companies like Konami and Sega are still involved in the more like gambling side of the arcades as well, in the sense of like the medal machines where you shoot the coins and you use the coins to push more coins down to get even more coins out of the machine, those kind of games, as well as the fact that I think like Sega even had a whole bingo thing going on as well. So like that part of it was actually kind of surprising to see. And completely unrelated to the large firms themselves, there's also another firm that was just there creating like kids arcade games, and like in the middle of all of the games that they had for kids, I just like, it just somehow caught my eye that they actually had like just roulette, and they're like it wasn't even like some kind of embellished little thing where it was like a different form of mini game that was essentially roulette but made to look like a different game. No, it was literally just roulette for kids on the machine itself. Like, hot damn. I know they say you gotta start them young, but like this feels a little too much, if anything. Don't you think so too, Sonic? Anyway, whole lot of legally not gambling casino games aside, they also did have a lot of actually more fun interactive stuff, such as like the fishing mini games, as well as those like shooting arcade games that you had back in the day, like Time Crisis and the like. Although with the shooting one they had there, it looked more like a practice range thing. Now I'm sure they probably had more grand ones, but that wasn't the one that was there, unfortunately. The fishing one looked kind of cool simply because it had like an actual rod that you could just like fish with, and that looked kind of cool. You know, I don't know, something about it just seems to like, I don't know why, it's just all this talk about like shooting and like fishing is kind of reminding me of something else that I feel like plug. I must just be imagining something. I don't know what's going on there. No, there were even some companies actually showing some on-rail shooter like machines as well. You know, the ones from back in the day where you basically just sat in a little giant cart with like a little minigun and you just had to like turn and fire on the screen. Those are pretty cool as well. Like the whole on-rails thing, it's been a genre that's been around for quite a while, and like I don't know why, but I feel like I don't really see as many new ones in arcades nowadays. So the fact that they're making some new ones is pretty cool. It's just that like for some reason this one as well is just giving me like what are these memories? I feel like I'm remembering something that I don't really want to. No, we're fine. We're all good here. Like, it must have just been the wind or something, I guess. You know, they also had darts machines there because for some reason darts are something that many arcades, like the old Sega, which I guess is the Gigos and the arcades in Akihabara now still have as well. Where on some of the upper floor Sonic arcades, they do have darts itself. So they did have many darts machines and there were actually like samples for some of the new darts machines, which I don't know why they even had samples for darts machines, since it does feel like with darts, it is something that most people can fairly do, like just a more specialized darts like cafe or bar or something, and there isn't really something that actually gives you a lot of special gimmicks that you can get with. But again, I'm just like getting a little bit of a it's just like something's just getting to me. I don't know what exactly it is, but leave me alone! Yeah, I really don't know what that was about. That was really weird. I feel like it's something like my brain is just trying to repress, but this is probably just a coincidence. Let's just move on. Anyway, it seemed like they had a section as well for many of the old retro arcade games, like actually the old style cabinets where you actually had the fight kit built into it. And they were actually showing many of the much older titles that were out there back in the day. Like, I didn't even know there were so many different fighting games at the time, to be honest. And more importantly, that was one of the few places in the entire event where you could actually walk in and sit down and play a game without having to wait like 50 minutes at all. Like, some of it was just completely empty, so you could just sit right down and just play instantly. Though, to be honest, one thing that I took away from all of that is that it's just kind of crazy like how many arcade games there are out there that just like never made it out of Japan and probably have become lost media at this point, because there were so many titles at these events, at this specific event rather, that I just never seen before. And I can imagine that when it comes to arcades, most of this were basically for machines that they never thought consumers would own in their own home. So many of it, once like it was not popular and didn't do well, they probably just like trashed it and lost it aside. And so a lot of the games that were on these and just never made its way to console, especially since like many of these games were only in Japan. And unlike with something like a console game where you have a physical copy that can very easily go overseas, with these it's like unless you knew someone who was very into the arcade scene, and even then those people may not have a full comprehensive list of all the games that existed on it. I can imagine that it's like kind of wild how many games might have just been lost, and that people not just overseas or something, but even within Japan would just never know existed, and like they would just never get to experience as a result of like how like the shift in arcade games in terms of its popularity and the style of games basically means that many of these old fighting games, for example, like the ones I saw that I've never seen before, might have just disappeared over time. And because like unlike something like a game for a nostalgic console overseas that people might collect for the nostalgic reason, and that led to like more people wanting to buy into it as well, with these they never really got that same limelight, and so I feel like a lot of them just ended up being things that people just don't talk about at all. And so like the thought of that and how many games could just be lost out there just kind of actually frightens me a little. But all the sadness and existential dread aside, I'm sure you guys didn't come here for that. There were a lot of themed snacks at the event itself as well. Like I did try out the Capcom Taiyaki, which was actually surprisingly affordable. I think they gave like 16 Taiyaki like balls for like 500 yen. The Taiyaki itself was actually fine. It had no stuffing in it, so maybe that's why, because it's just the Taiyaki filling itself and just that, so they may have just like cut the price because of that. And the thing is that I don't think I've ever heard of like Capcom Taiyaki before until this event, and in case it was kind of hard to tell, they did have a little sign telling you like which characters they were based off of as well, except for maybe the more human character based ones, because those I feel like they just didn't turn out looking very right from the Taiyaki. Like I don't know, with Leon it looks like his brain might have just like become a Jill sandwich instead of anything. Aside from that, there was also the live stage area that was running out throughout the entire event period as well. With the live stage, it's basically a stage that this played a lot of the rhythm game music that a lot of these companies, basically your Sega, Taito, Bandai Namco, and Konami, who all basically have made rhythm games in the past. A compilation of all of the music from the rhythm games made by all of these companies, and it's just like being performed on stage for the entire day. Unfortunately, you needed a special ticket for the live itself, which you had to book early, and it cost like 7,000 yen, and I didn't manage to get it. So I didn't manage to go in, and even if I did, I probably wouldn't be able to film inside, or I'll get tossed out of the entire event. So either way, there wasn't really much I could show you guys for it, but I did manage to, like a peasant once again, stand outside and look in as the rave music was playing and the lights were flashing across the wall, and like get a glimpse of it. And from looking at just that, as well as hearing the cheers on the spot, and as well as like seeing all the tweets as well as like the pictures put up on Twitter for what was happening in there, it did seem like I was actually quite hyped. So it looks like my kind of place. In fact, I'll probably not be able to film it. It's like kind of unfortunate, but it's kind of cool that they actually had the ability to like hold that for the entirety of the event period. And I guess in a way it also does serve as a testament to like how much history there is in terms of like rhythm games across the years, just generally, that you can actually just have an event where you just have music playing from all of these different rhythm games, as well as all the DJs, all the musicians, the composers, just going on for the entire period. Now, personally, from sitting outside of the hall, because of the fact it's just open air, I could just hear all the music anyway, so you could still enjoy the vibe of it even outside. But it's one of those things I feel like it's a very like you either love it or hate it thing, right? It's kind of like Marmite or Stinky Tofu, I guess, where it's like if you either really like the type of music that arcade games have, or you really despise it, because a lot of it is very electronic, it's very EDM, it's very bass heavy, and well, I can see myself hyping outside, and like if I was inside, I'll probably just like be like headbanging along to it. I can imagine it can turn off quite a few people as well. Depending on what you like, it might just give you a headache rather than a fun experience instead. That said, overall, I feel like it was a pretty interesting experience. I feel like walking through did give me a very good reminder of how much arcade games have advanced over the years. Like remembering how arcades used to be like back when I was young, and like it was basically a lot of like your on-rails card things, as well as Time Crisis, House of the Dead, and the old cabinet machines with the fight kits built onto it. And then like going to them nowadays and seeing all of the network battle games, like even Kankole, was fairly old at this point, it's still something that is a very unique experience with the way that the game plays, that you can't really do it at home as well. The same for the JoJo. Actually, no, I feel like the JoJo Battle Arena Battle Royale thing could very well be easily done at home. I don't know why that's an arcade game, to be honest. But with many of the modern rhythm games, especially like Tunism, Ongeki, My 2, these are things that are just so interesting to be able to play, and it's like the machines themselves are so inhibitive cost-wise that the only way you can really do it is to go down to an arcade and play it, and it's like it really is something that you can't just do with a keyboard or a controller from like a PS5 or something. So it's kind of interesting to see all of the things that these companies are showcasing there, and how the arcades have basically gone down this different route of trying to focus more on giving people experiences that you can't get at home instead, which makes sense, because otherwise I feel like it will be very hard to compete with like some kid buying a random like cheap ass laptop to play Minecraft or League of Legends with his friends. Then you have things like Ongeki, as well as the upcoming Idolmaster game too, where they basically have like collectible cards instead, where you can basically feel more attached to the game in a way, since like the items that you use in the game, you can basically hold a physical copy of it to some extent in your hand, and basically keep it around for memories, even if the game does like die one day, which is a depressing thing to think about. But you know, you get used to it when you grow old enough, I feel like. That said, if you want to experience something fairly different, especially for those of you who never really got to experience an arcade, or for whom arcades are a very nostalgic thing of the past, I feel like there's a lot to see at this event that might give you a little bit of a better understanding of what arcades were like, or you might just take a little bit of the nostalgia boner. I didn't mean that, you know. This is a thing. Though that said, well, I would say that this isn't the kind of event that you would specifically want to come down for just for itself, unless you're in the arcade business itself. There are still many other events that do happen during the period, like just the day after on Sunday, because the event takes place on a Saturday. You have Comedia, which is the original Content Dojo event that I've talked about in the past as well. And you do have a bunch of other events like that, as well as pop-up stores and cafes that go on during the period. So there's plenty to see within like Tokyo itself while you're you're here for this event, and you can then go around and do like a bunch of other stuff and look through a bunch of other events on the other days as well. So while I wouldn't recommend specifically just coming down for it, I feel like if you want to plan a trip to Japan and you want to see just like more varied like gaming culture or just like weeb culture stuff as well, it might be a very good or decent period at least to experience things that might be fairly different from the anime Japan or the comic cats that people usually come down for. But that's it. That's all for today's video. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you to the very cool people here for helping to support the channel as always. And thank you to all of you super cool viewers as well for watching all of the videos. It's thanks to you guys that I'm able to continue the channel, and you guys especially as well that I'm able to fund some of the silly stuff I do. Maybe not so much the stuff I do in this video specifically, but for some of the larger scale videos, the longer form ones especially, where I talk about like soul games with like a bunch of skits in them, or it gives me the ability to like set aside more time to like work on some of the other longer form game industry related videos as well. Thank you guys once again. I'll be preparing for the other video that I'm hopefully gonna get out by the end of the month, and like that's gonna have to like be balanced with all of the work I have to do since I've been working overtime quite a lot recently. So if I do seem a little out of it in this specific video, it is because like my brain has been a little fried with all of the work I've been doing recently. But don't worry, I'm still alive and my brain is still mostly fine, I think. Hopefully I'll get the next video done in time. And that's it. Y'all take care until then. And goodbye. Bye-bye.